koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Perhaps I should sit down after that applause. Maybe I've done my job. I think the last speaker, there's a saying that taxation is the only thing that stands between civilization and barbarism. And I think we saw with the last speaker down the end towards barbarism. What I'd like to do today is with my time here, is to explain the circumstances where mana has come from, and then to talk about mana's education policy. So the first thing I want to say is that tonight at 7:30, in fact just about now, on Television 3 there's a documentary starting called Inside Child Poverty, and I had the privilege of seeing a preview of that over the weekend. And what that documentary shows is are things that should make us all deeply ashamed and deeply embarrassed in this country. Because what that program does, it doesn't just talk about figures, because we all know the figures, but they actually go into people's homes and they see the reality of the situation that people in Pororua East and Wellington are facing. The living conditions that those people live in, crowded conditions, mouldy rooms, and these are in Housing New Zealand places, mouldy rooms, damp, children with third world diseases, children with terrible skin infections, children with damage to their lungs which will last for the rest of their lives, and children through rheumatic fever having damage to their heart valves. These diseases and this situation wasn't in New Zealand when I grew up. It wasn't there. This is something which has come about through the last 27 years of Rogernomics. When Labour got in 1984, they introduced this radical economic theory called Rogernomics, which is dubbed Rogernomics. And what that did is it increased the gap dramatically between rich and poor. That's summarising it in one sentence. So while we have hundreds of thousands of children in New Zealand right now living in poverty, real poverty, in a land of plenty, we have people at the other end who have become obscenely wealthy at their expense. And I'm talking about these people here. This is the rich list, the Business Roundtable, the National Business Review's rich list of the 150 wealthiest New Zealanders. John Key's in here. 150 wealthiest New Zealanders who last year had an increase in wealth of $7 billion. They did not earn that money, and they did not pay tax on that money because most of it was through capital gains. This is the obscenity that we are living with in New Zealand. The documentary on television tonight showing what's happened to kids over the last 27 years, this showing us this year what's happened in this country. It is indeed. Well, it's the people and the values they represent which I think are things which should disgust all of us. So what I'm saying is that if they'd done that documentary based in this electorate, which is one of the poorest electorates in New Zealand, they would find exactly the same thing. We'd find overcrowding, third world diseases, children with awful infections, skin infections. They would find poverty, they'd find hungry kids, they'd find all of those things that we find in Pororua East. And yet, when I looked through the internet in the last week to try and find one example where the local MP has spoken out on any of those issues which are deeply affecting the people of this community, I couldn't find a single example. I couldn't find a single example of a media release, a single statement made anywhere. And I think that is a disgrace, and I'm challenging the local MP when he speaks to explain why we have massive wealth in a land of plenty, and why it is that of those 27 years, 15 of those years we had a Labour government, 12 years we had National. And if anyone's to blame more, I would say that it's Labour rather than National. And the Labour and National candidates for this seat are sitting together at the front here, and I think that's symbolic, because for most of the time you can't fit a cigarette paper between National and Labour policies. And I'll just a brief quote from Hansard here from the local member, talking more than 20 years ago about the economic policy of Rogernomics, which has caused so much destruction. It is pleasing that the people of New Zealand realise that some drastic action is necessary and that they have accepted Rogernomics as being a necessary step towards a changed economy. Well, that is a disgrace. Now, if the member has changed his mind, in the meantime, that will be good to hear from him today. But what he's talking about there is the Rogernomics framework, which he supported, which has set up this country with hundreds of thousands of kids growing up in poverty and a very tiny number of people, the 1%, becoming obscenely wealthy. Last point to make on that, the Dominion newspaper emphasised this last week when they showed that the top 1% of New Zealanders have 3 times more wealth than the poorest half of New Zealanders. And if that's not obscene, I don't know what is, when we've got children growing up in the sort of conditions that are shown on that documentary tonight. So I want to move on to our education policy, because this is an opportunity for us to talk about a policy which is being released tonight. There's 4 parts of it that I want to talk briefly about. First of all, Mana will put the free back into free education. What that means is early childhood education to meet the needs of parents, not on arbitrary numbers, but to meet the needs of every parent. We would not allow schools to solicit donations from parents. You can't stop people walking up the street and making a donation, but the government would fund schools, every school in the country, to provide high quality education for every child, and that means a significant increase in funding, but we would not allow parents to be asked to top up the fees, because the things they're being asked to top up are in reality essentials. We would wind down and abolish completely tertiary education fees. And anyone who tells me we can't afford these things, we can easily afford them by introducing taxes that should have been there all the way through, taxing the unearned income of people on extremely high incomes. We'd also restore the funding for adulting and community education. So putting the free back into free education is fundamental for us. We also want to bring the Māori language, make it a compulsory language, up to level 1 at NCEA. When I went to school, it was compulsory for me to learn French up to level 1 NCEA. I have no idea why, but that's what we did. We just did it because that's what you had to do. It would have been far better for me and far better for the whole country if we had Māori as our compulsory subject. And just down the road here we've got King's College, and King's College, I've been critical of King's College in lots of ways, the way they put their hand out for government funding all the time, and this year they're getting $3.5 million in government funding when the school next door, Otahuhu College, is struggling to provide high quality education for kids. But I'll say this for King's College, at Form 3 they make Māori language compulsory for everyone, and I think that's really good and they deserve credit for that. So I think doing that would recognise Māori as an official language of the country, and it would help to build a genuine understanding of Māori language, Māori culture, because I think this country, we still see it in the words of people like Michael Laws and what have you. There's a resonance with deep-seated racism that I think we can get rid of with greater understanding. It comes through language, because language is the cornerstone of culture. Third policy, feed the kids. For the cost of bringing back our troops from Afghanistan, we'd save $40 million. It would cost $38 million on the best estimates we have to provide breakfast and lunch for every child in a decile 1 to 3 school. Why aren't we doing it? We would start with decile 1 to 3, but we'd provide it across the board. But we have to start where the need is greatest. And what that would do, that would revitalise the relationship between parents and schools. Parents come in to prepare the lunches, parents come in to help out with the school gardens, where they're producing food to go into those lunches. there's a whole dynamic around that, which means it's a proper, the school becomes the hub of the community. It brings parents in, and through that process, education goes back into the homes. We can do this, we can revitalise our schools, and we can make every school throughout New Zealand the best school in the country for the kids in their local community. Another thing we would do, we would abolish national standards, because national standards are nothing to do with improving educational opportunities for kids. Because every teacher in every school, in every classroom in this country knows which kids are falling behind. They know the kids that need the extra support. What they need is the resources to help them. And that's what mana would do. So look at what, so why would we, why would National push such an awful policy of national standards? They would push it against all of the professionals in education. They're pushing it because they want to create a market model in education. They want to have the private sector having opportunities to come in and to invest in education. They're already doing it with some of the new schools that are established through public-private partnerships. If they can privatise anything in the community, they will do it. If they can find one of their friends to make a profit out of anything, they will do it. That's why they're selling out state assets, and that's why they want national standards in schools. So what we would do is we'd invest that money into the programs that are already existing in schools, and there are lots of these programs which are making a real difference for Māori and Pacifica kids. What we need is the resources to make those programs work. So that's my presentation this evening, and I leave saying that as I said before, that I'd be very keen to hear what the local member of Parliament has had to say or not say about any of these critical issues of child poverty that are being played out tonight on television as we sit here. So thank you very much for listening, and have a good evening. The teacup travesty, I'll make one comment about this, that I think John Banks is being stood in Epsom because they knew Don Brash was unelectable. Don Brash has never been elected anywhere in the country to anything. He's come into Parliament through the list. He's unelectable. His policies are unelectable. So what they've done is they're using John Banks as a stalking horse to bring Brash into Parliament. In all Brash's pronouncements, hammering Māori, for example, that's just using Māori as a platform to try and resonate with racist New Zealanders to support ACT, because they're desperate to get Brash into Parliament. Brash is not interested in Māori particularly. What he's really interested in is the economy which his policies have screwed this country for 27 years. I hope he gets taken out in Epsom, and I hope we never see ACT again on the planet.